And tonight we continue our quest to find some of the more colourful characters in Australian business, both here and abroad. I'm talking to an Australian expat living in London who is a very well-known media identity over there, but probably less well-known in his homeland, although he still has quite a following through his book and website. Richard Farleigh came from an impoverished background as the 8th child of an itinerant shearer who was taken into foster care when he was only a toddler, and after being dismissed at school as not very bright, rose to become one of the biggest earners in Bankers Trust in the 1980s, where he ran their fledgling derivatives desk. He went on to make his first fortune running a hedge fund in Bermuda, and at only 34 was able to retire to Monaco. He then made another fortune in the UK during the dot-com boom and continues to invest in startups, as well as being something of a media celebrity over there thanks to his TV appearances on programs like Dragon's Den. He joins me now from London. Welcome, Richard. Hello.
Hey, Janine, how are you?
Nice to finally get you here.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me? We have had some technical difficulties,
I can hear you very well.
But you're finally there. Now, before we get to the really good stuff, like your new reality show, which features bucks and blondes, let's do the serious stuff. Could you tell us what the financial climate looks like on the ground over there?
Well, you can probably see Big Ben behind me, I think. The economy is probably, and the situation in Europe is probably just as grim as the weather here, I've got to say. I mean, I'm sure you follow what's been going on in Europe, and, you know, we've had all sorts of stuff going on here. Obviously, you know, the Duchess Fergie has admitted that she was drinking before she tried to get some money out of some investors. I mean, we've had, you know, sort of expenses rorts. We've had, you know, the public sector complaints about the wages there. And one guy's Office of Fair Trading is earning $400,000 Aussie dollars equivalent. So you know, it's pretty lively over here, you might say, at the moment.
Lively, but would you say the UK's got its own problems, not really worrying about Greece, or is the whole of Europe a worry at the moment?
Well, obviously the whole of Europe is a problem at the moment, you know, with Greece being bailed out. I mean, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating time. You know, the euro's weak against the American dollar. I mean, the pound has obviously been very, very weak over the last, you know, 12 to 18 months. So, yeah, it's paying the price. You know, you've probably seen that the government borrowing here is blowing out. I know that's a little bit of a problem in Australia, but nothing compared to here. They're talking about 12% of GDP for government borrowing. So obviously there's a lot going on with the new government trying to implement cuts. You know, so there's going to all sorts of toing and throwing with the coalition as well.
Makes Australia look good. And now I know you don't directly invest in Australia these days, but you do keep an eye on it, no doubt. Do we look as good over there as we think we do?
Well, Australia looks fantastic, actually, not just because of the lousy weather that we've got here on the 1st of June, but, you know, I know there's been a lot of sort of disquiet about the weakening currency, but the Aussie dollar was the strongest currency in, you know, last year. Commodity prices were very strong last year. So really, you know, the retracement has been, you know, just on the more recent worries, but in general, the Aussie dollar's been strong. You know, obviously the government balance is something to be talked about, but you know, the growth rate's still very good. You've still got 2 or 3% or more in the growth rate. So I think Australia looks very good. You know, I mean, I wonder there if the banks sort of stayed out of trouble because they were too silly or because they were too clever. But the banking system's been better there than everywhere else, and that's, you know, they've continued to lend, and housing is very strong. So, you know, it almost looks like a bit of a bubble in Australia right now.
Well, they'd say it's because they were clever, but you mentioned the Aussie dollar, and obviously there's been a lot of concern about the gyrations. You used to trade the currency. Wasn't it always a volatile commodity-based play?
Well, it's always been a commodity-based play. I mean, and now, you know, I think in Australia, I think if I'm right, commodities are about 40% of the export base of Australia, whereas they used to be about 20%. So, oddly enough, rather than the sort of exports diversifying from Australia, they've actually narrowed. So, commodities are super important for the Aussie dollar. But, you know, when there was always an expression about the Aussie, which it goes up by the fire stairs and down by the down by the lift shaft. In other words, it goes up very slowly but steadily, and then when it does fall with a crisis of confidence, it just collapses. And that's pretty well what's happened. That's continued to happen. It still is the same pattern. I mean, it is a sort of a currency which, you know, around the world is viewed as a good bet But when people get nervous about anything, even if it's Greece or North Korea, you know, they suddenly dump it and it's off a few cents overnight.
I ask you about that because I don't know if you've kept up with the great mining super tax debate here, which is being blamed for everything from the collapse in the share prices to the Aussie dollar. How much blame do you think